I want you to meet two people on one ordinary Tuesday morning at the age of 40. The first checks their bank account without thinking twice. No knot in the stomach. If the car died this afternoon or the job vanished next month, it would be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. The second wakes up that same Tuesday in a nicer house, with a newer car in the driveway, and checks their account with a low, constant pressure they've learned to live with. On paper, this person earns considerably more. By their own private math, they're two missed paychecks from everything unraveling. 10 years ago, the day each of them turned 30, you could not have told them apart. Same income, about $70,000. Same city. Same intelligence. No inheritance, no windfall, no secret. I'm going to call them Priya and David, and I need you to hold on to both, because there's one detail about these two I won't tell you until the very end, and when I do, it changes what this entire decade means. The distance between those two Tuesday mornings opened silently. And it starts with the single most expensive thing that will probably happen to you in the next 10 years. Not a crash. Not a layoff. Not a bad investment. Your next raise. The average new car payment in America right now is about $767 a month. Take that one payment and put it into the market instead, at a 7% average annual return, for a working life, about 35 years. And 7% is an assumption, not a promise. Markets don't hand you a smooth number. But run it, and that single monthly payment is worth roughly $1.4 million. That's what a raise does when you haven't decided in advance what it's for. It doesn't arrive as money. It arrives as permission. And every decision that follows is small, defensible, and completely reasonable on the day you make it, which is exactly why it works. Economists call it lifestyle creep. Every upgrade feels extraordinary for about a month and then becomes invisible. The payment attached to it never becomes invisible. So you don't really buy things in your 30s. You buy obligations. This is how someone earning $90,000 ends up with less breathing room than someone earning $52,000. A high income with high fixed costs isn't wealth. It's a nicer cage. David thought he was buying reliability. Every raise, his life grew to meet it. He wasn't reckless. He was normal. That's precisely the problem. Now the obvious response is, fine, I'll get serious once I'm earning a bit more, once things settle down. That sentence is the second cost, and it's worse than the first. Because most people think this is a money story. It isn't. It's a calendar story. $500 a month at 7%, from 30 to 65, becomes about $900,000. The identical 500, started at 40, becomes about $400,000. 10 years of waiting cost you nearly $500,000. So you're not behind on money. You're behind on time. Hold on to that sentence, later I'm going to show you exactly what it means. Priya automated a few $100s the month she turned 30 and then forgot it existed. That was the entire strategy. She thought she was buying calm. She was actually buying time. Which raises the obvious question. If the math is this simple, why do intelligent, numerate people keep getting it wrong? Let me answer with a question researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health actually put to people. Choose between two worlds. In the first, you earn $50,000 a year and everyone around you earns $25,000. In the second, you earn $100,000, double the money, but everyone around you earns $200,000. In pure financial terms this isn't close. The second world makes you twice as rich. 56% of people chose the first. Think about what that actually means. The majority said they'd rather be objectively poorer, cut their real income in half, as long as they were ahead of the people around them. They didn't want more money. They wanted to be winning. That study, published by Solnick and Hemingway in 1998, explains more about your 30s than any budgeting advice ever will. Because it means most of the spending in this decade isn't about the thing being purchased. It's about position. And the scoreboard is rigged, because the people who look like they're winning are very often the ones with the least underneath. David never made a decision that felt like status. He just bought the car that was normal to own where he lived. That's how it always works. Everything so far has been money leaving. But the investment that will most likely make you more money than anything else in your life isn't in your brokerage account. It isn't real estate. It isn't crypto. It's your salary. And your salary at 40 is mostly decided by what you chose to learn at 33. Because this is the decade many people quietly stop climbing. Competence sets in, the work gets comfortable, and the career flattens at exactly the moment it should be accelerating. Here's how lopsided that is. Picture yourself at 32, earning $70,000, with about $40,000 invested. Now imagine a spectacular year in the market, up 30%. The year people screenshot and talk about at dinner. It hands you $12,000, and left alone until 65 it becomes about $112,000. Now the boring version. That same year, you get a 10% raise instead. $7,000, not once, but every year for the rest of your career. Invest just that difference and by 65 it's worth about $900,000. The raise beats the spectacular market year by roughly 8 to 1. And nobody celebrates the raise. David was excellent at his job by 34. He stayed exactly that good for 6 more years. Now, I told you to hold on to a sentence. You're not behind on money, you're behind on time. Here's what that actually means, and it's the thing that quietly governs every decision in this video. Money has an age. Every dollar you keep in your 30s has employees. It goes out and works for 35 years without you. At 7%, $1 you don't spend at 30 comes back as about 11. A dollar in your 50s has far fewer years left to work. That same dollar comes back as less than 3. Which means in your 30s, when you spend $1,000, you're not spending $1,000. You're spending roughly $10,000. The weekend that costs $2,000 costs $20. The upgrade that costs $5 costs $50. And here's the part that should stop you. That identical $1,000 mistake, made at 50, costs you under $3,000. Barely a third as much. So the decade when you finally feel entitled to enjoy your money, when the raises land, when you've earned it, when everyone tells you you deserve it, is the exact decade when your money is worth the most it will ever be worth in your life. Your mistakes will never again be this expensive. And nothing about your 30s feels that way while you're inside them. Which brings me to the last of the money costs. David's transmission failed when he was 38. $2,000. It went on a credit card, because everything he earned was already committed to the life he'd assembled. That card took him 19 months to clear, and during those 19 months he invested nothing at all. One repair, on one ordinary Tuesday, quietly erased 2 years of his future. He never thought of it as a financial decision. He thought of it as a car problem. Only about 41% of Americans could cover a $1,000 emergency straight from savings. And that sounds like a math problem, but it isn't. There's a landmark study, Mullainathan and Schaffer, published in Science, showing the mental strain of scarcity acts like a tax on your brain. When every decision is pressured by not enough, your measured ability to think clearly and plan ahead drops by an amount comparable to losing a full night of sleep. Permanently. Being broke doesn't just cost you money. It costs you the exact clarity you'd need to stop being broke. So margin isn't idle money doing nothing. Margin is what lets every other good decision survive a bad month. Now I have to tell you something about making this video. I started it convinced this was a money problem. And somewhere in the research I realized I had it backwards. Because the most expensive things this decade takes never appear in a bank account at all. You postpone your health, because at 35 you can still get away with it. That deferral becomes your 40s medical bills, the kind of expense that erases a decade of careful investing in a single year. And then there's the one I didn't expect. You spend your friendships without ever deciding to. There's a specific moment that happens to almost everybody in this decade. Something goes genuinely wrong, the diagnosis, the layoff, the marriage cracking, and you reach for your phone to call the person who would have been the first call at 25. You scroll to their name. And you realize you haven't spoken in 3 years. That calling now would mean explaining 3 years. That they have their own life, their own version of this decade, and you'd be arriving as an emergency instead of a friend. So you put the phone down. And you handle it alone. Nobody ended that friendship. There was no argument, no falling out, no moment you could point to. It was just never anyone's turn to text. And the Harvard study of adult development, 87 years, the longest study of adult life ever run, found that the strongest predictor of how healthy and happy people were in their 80s wasn't wealth, or career success, or intelligence. It was the quality of exactly those relationships. The ones this decade spends without ever putting a price on them. Every year, another doorway closes quietly. The mortgage, the seniority, the school district. Each one is a good thing. Each one is a door shutting behind you. It's why the same decision costs so much more at 39 than it did at 31. Priya kept one standing dinner every month with the same 3 people for the entire decade. It cost her almost nothing. It's the reason she wasn't alone at 38. So where does that leave you? If you're early in this decade, you're holding the most valuable asset in this entire video and you've barely spent any of it. If you're in the middle, this is your highest leverage moment. If you're late in your 30s and feeling behind, your income is near its peak and a focused few years genuinely changes the outcome. And if you've just crossed 40 wondering whether this was a eulogy for a chance you missed, it wasn't. The best time was 10 years ago. The second best time is the reason you're still watching. So what did Priya actually do differently? It comes down to a single principle, and it's smaller than you want it to be. She made her biggest financial decisions before the money ever reached her checking account. That's the whole thing. The raise was allocated before it arrived, so her life never learned to expect it. The investing was automated at 30, when the amount was small enough to be slightly embarrassing. None of it required being brilliant. It required deciding once, in advance, so she never had to decide again on the days when nothing seemed to be at stake. And now the thing I promised you at the beginning. David and Priya were never two people. They were two versions of the same person, two futures branching out of the same decade, from the same paycheck, separated by nothing more than 1,000 small, ordinary, invisible choices made on days that felt like they didn't count. Because here's what your 30s never tell you while you're inside them. This decade isn't asking you to be rich. It's asking you to be intentional. It rewards attention far more than income, and it punishes autopilot no matter how much you earn. The costs stay silent precisely because the mistakes feel so cheap while you're making them. So the only question that really matters is the one you get to start answering today. 10 years from now, on some ordinary Tuesday morning, which version of you is checking that account? And if this made something click, the next thing worth understanding is why we sabotage ourselves with money even when we know better, the psychology sitting underneath every single one of these decisions. That's where this goes deeper.